Socialism Kills and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is Garrick Ross. How's it going?
Oh, it's another day in paradise, Mark.
And of course, we have Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Katora, our producer. So as you can tell, for the past few podcasts, we've been light on our millennials and or our boomers only because of the fact that people are social distancing.
Yeah, you can never be too careful, Mark.
And we're social distancing ourselves here as well. And we, of course, invite people to come, and we're keeping our distance from each other, even though we are in the same room. So this podcast is called Socialism Kills and the Dumbest Bill in America. And of course, as you know, Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race.
Much to everybody's surprise.
Poor Bernie. I can't believe I'm surprised he dropped out.
The DNC rigged it again. Oh, I'm surprised too, especially after 2016 where he just went the distance. He had the money to go to the distance if he wanted to. But I don't know. I guess he just saw the writing on the wall and figured it would probably look bad for him to probably tank another.
And I have my theory, and I'm sure you do too, numerous theories as to why Bernie actually dropped out, which we're going to discuss during this podcast. We're also going to discuss, of course, the Soviet Union a little bit and communism in China and in what the long-term effect is going to be on the world and also on China. But first up, here's Bernie saying, bye-bye, here's my exit speech, and we have a clip on it, and here it is.
So while we are winning the ideological battle, and while we are winning the support of so many young people and working people throughout the country, I have concluded that this battle for the Democratic nomination will not be successful. And so today, I am announcing the suspension of my campaign.
He's suspending his campaign. He's really not dropping out. There is a difference. A suspended campaign is a campaign that is still alive all the way through the Democrat National Committee, the convention. And when he gets to the convention, he still has a campaign that has money. It's still alive. He can still advocate for delegates.
Has pledged delegates, and he can
That's
pledge
exactly
them
right.
however he wants.
So he has withdrawn from campaigning, but he's suspended his campaign in that sense. But otherwise, he has not quit the campaign. I just want to make that clear because that's an important distinction. Yep. A lot of people don't understand. So of course,
he'll have a lot of power too. Because I mean, if you look at the states that he did win, it was California is a big one. The whole left coast, Oregon, Washington. There's a lot of delegates there. Several ones in the Midwest and one on the East Coast. But that's a lot of power, especially California. California is a big prize at the convention, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get concessions by holding those delegates for any reason and or trying to get something in return.
Yeah. So. Millennials love Bernie.
Love him.
Millennials
Don't go
love
out and vote for him, though. Therein lies the big problem.
And here's the question, and I think Bernie's trying to pose this question, which is why he just suspended his campaign. Whom will they support instead? Whom will millennials support instead of Bernie? And we have a second clip on Bernie talking about, and all these clips are short today, so you'll love this second clip. He's going to start talking about all of the things that how he's changed the world, and he's changed the Democrat Party, which, by the way, is true. And here is the clip.
If we don't believe that we are entitled to live in a world of justice, democracy, and fairness without racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, or religious bigotry, we will continue to have massive income and wealth inequality, prejudice and hatred, mass incarceration, terrified immigrants, and hundreds of thousands of Americans sleeping out on the streets in the richest country on earth.
I think he's talking about China, actually. I think he's talking about the way they treat people. And I think it's also interesting when he's talking about people sleeping in the streets. He's talking about America's major cities run by Democrats, run by progressives, run by de facto socialists. The man is still in la la land, but I don't know why, for some reason, the millennials still love him. Why don't you like him?
Why don't I like him? Oh, well, I have a philosophy where I apply that everything should give me the most amount of freedom, whether it's legislation or orders or anything like that. So I'm always pretty freedom-minded. I also believe in a robust free market economy, which has basically lifted every impoverished country and, the growing developing country out of poverty. I mean, the United States made great strides, not because of communism or socialism, but because of capitalism. And similarly with China, after the Great Leap Forward and all those other issues, they've adopted a generally marketed approach to the economy with, a communist, supreme government. But, it's been the principles of capitalism that have reigned pretty substantively well over the last 100 years. So,
but not according to Bernie and a lot of your colleagues in the millennial, the millennial area, people born between 1980 and 2000.
Because I think a lot of the younger millennials, around my age, people just leaving college and whatnot and getting into their first jobs, they don't have the frame of reference of, a lot of real world practical experience, working, things like that, the effects of taxes and the effects of having a large portion of your income deducted for programs that you will never personally see, which is one of my big problems with social policies in general, is that I pay all this money, but I never ever get anything out of it, and I probably never will. I mean...
All of what money? What are you talking about?
35-40% of my paycheck goes to taxes every month, and you'll never see any of those programs benefit you in your life. Bernie wants more, 50-60%,
at
up
least.
to 80-90 if you're in the wealthier half of the country.
At least.
But, look at Social Security. I don't know that by the time that I am 55, 60 or whatever, that there will be a valid Social Security program for me to be able to receive money out of. I am planning my life under the assumption that it wouldn't be there. And I know a lot of people in your generation, Mark, are operating under the same premise. I mean, I think we're like 5 years away from having to...
Yeah, I'm assuming it's going to be reduced substantially.
Yeah, reduced
I'm not
payments,
going to be able to live on
you're
it.
not going to be able to get the whole 100% out, you wouldn't be able to live on it, and it's a tragedy because a lot of people are being promised that these programs will be there to take care of them, but they won't be. And that's my problem with socialism. But I also think a lot of people my age still believe that a lot of these things will work, and by the time... I think there's a merit that they're young still and that they haven't had these real world experiences. A lot of, I think, people in your generation say, you're a socialist until you start paying taxes. At which point you kind of come more to the libertarian side.
Yeah, you're
of
a
things.
socialist until you get a job and start paying taxes, and then you're a socialist until such time as someone asks you, hey, will you give me some of your money so that I can stay at home, watch TV, even though I'm able-bodied and do nothing. And unfortunately, that's the kind of the laugh test that the socialists like Bernie don't really want to talk about because they really can't have... That's why he doesn't have a sense of humor.
No.
If you ever notice, the man never tells jokes.
Larry David does a better Bernie Sanders than Bernie Sanders.
Agreed. And
He's actually funny.
We have another clip of Bernie talking about his impact on the Democrat Party, which is kind of interesting since Bernie has always been an independent. But here's the last very small, short clip. And here's Bernie.
As I hope all of you know, this race has never been about me. I ran for the presidency because I believe that as a president, I could accelerate and institutionalize the progressive changes that we are all building together. And if we keep organizing and fighting, I have no doubt but that is exactly what will happen. While the path may be slower now, we will change this nation and, with like-minded friends around the globe, change the entire world.
So he wants to change the nation, which we always knew that, and he wants to change the world. But here's the problem. Here's the reason I think Bernie dropped out, other than the fact that it's pretty clear that the Democrat Party is certainly rallying behind Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders has dropped out because millennials clearly have to be seeing, including millennial progressives and socialists, clearly have to be seeing that socialism kills, that China, a communist country, socialism and communism are one and the same, because communism is, according to Karl Marx, the perfection of socialism. It is socialism perfected. Millennials have to be seeing now that China is a country that is not transparent. People across the globe are dying because of their lack of transparency, because of the fact that you really can ask questions of, why do you have these wet markets open? Why are people eating all of these wild animals? Why are people getting sick? What actually happened? How many people actually died? We actually don't even know how many people have died in China. We have to rely on what they're telling us because they've kicked most of the media out and they're controlling the story. So what do you think about millennials? Are they really going to stay the course? The progressive millennials and the socialist millennials, are they going to stay the course? Are they going to continue to follow Bernie, or are they going to just maybe potentially sit home this election?
I think you're going to see kind of like what happened in 2016. So you're going to have your die-hard Bernie bros, and those are the people who I think just, it's either Bernie or bust. Bernie's on the ballot or they're not showing up. But I also think that a lot of people this go around really overestimated the amount of draw that Bernie had in that demographic, young people especially. Because if you look at somebody like Pete Buttigieg, who, while, on this show we might believe that, he's a lot farther left than most people than he really, as he appeals to people, his lane was pretty moderate, and you saw a lot of young people gravitated towards him as a fresh voice. And I also thought that in 2016, Bernie wasn't so much this big progressive candidate that everybody loved because of his progressive policies, but he was just the other guy on the ballot. And for all those people who haven't liked Clinton because Hillary was a pretty hateable figure in politics, Bernie provided an outlet, and you kind of respected him. Look, I may not agree with Bernie, but Bernie is one of the few politicians that I kind of have a sympathy for, because for the last 40 years he said the same things, and he's never really wavered. He's always been ideologically
I have no sympathy
consistent.
for Bernie Sanders, just to let you know. I understand what you're saying. I know what you're saying, that Bernie Sanders has always kept the same philosophy and ideology. He hasn't wavered from that.
Yes.
I think that's definitely the case.
Oh,
but
yeah.
But I have no sympathy for him, because throughout history, including the 20th century, where we had 100 million people murdered in the name of communism and socialism,
Yep.
now we have the 21st century, where millennials didn't have that sense of history because they didn't live through it. And now we have a pandemic and people are dying because of communism and socialism.
Yeah.
And Bernie is unelectable for that reason, because he is directly connected to both of those because he says so.
However, I think you'll see. So you asked me, what do you think about countries like China and how they respond to this? And I think that you'll start seeing a lot of people oppose the authoritarian and communist nature of China in China. But I think what you're going to see here in the United States is a lot of people looking at capitalism and our government structure now. And although I believe we're in a corporate cronyist capitalist market where the government has too heavy a hand in things, a lot of people are going to say that the government should have more of a hand in things here, especially when it comes to healthcare. And,
Well, we saw that with the stimulus, the $2.2 trillion stimulus, where the Democrat Party wanted to provide money to everyone, including the Kennedy Center.
Which I'm sure we'll discuss
They
a
gave the
little bit
Kennedy
later,
Center $25 million, only to find out that they laid people off immediately after the Kennedy Center got the $25 million. So it really wasn't about the jobs.
No,
it was
no.
about cronyism, of course.
Yeah.
In that case, that really wasn't even capitalism. That was just pure, downright cronyism.
Yeah.
Well, we said that Bernie never really had a sense of humor, and Ronald Reagan always did, and he always made fun of communism. And I really loved his jokes because obviously I lived during the Reagan era, and I'm very proud of it. Even actually had an opportunity to meet the man in the White House, which I think is fantastic. But Reagan made jokes about communism, and this is something that's really important because of the fact that we have this epic battle. We defeated communism in the 20th century. Now we have this epic battle where we're trying to defeat communism and socialism in our own country, but also against China and North Korea and others, of course. And so here is Reagan, a really quick clip of Reagan talking about communism.
Name him, I don't want to embarrass him, but one of the heads of state that I met with on this visit, he gave me one while I was on the way. Told me the story about the two fellows in the Soviet Union that were walking down the street, and the one of them says, "Have we really achieved full communism? Is this it? Is this now full communism?" And the other one said, "Oh, hell no, things are going to get a lot worse."
Absolutely. And they did, by the way. Throughout the 1980s, especially, communism got worse and worse. People were, they were always in lines to be able to buy just the basic food necessities. There was never enough of anything.
Yeah, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, HW had to actually send food aid to actually feed the Soviet people.
And the Chinese communists know that they have to keep growing their economy and providing more and more to the people so that they don't try to overthrow the communist government, because they had the lesson of the Soviet Union. They know this. That's going to be a problem now, though, because the pandemic it's caused a new problem. You know what that problem is? Problem is that lots of countries are going to start moving production and supply chains out of China.
Yes.
And if they don't have employment growth with 1.35 billion people, this society collapses. And by the way, it probably almost collapsed anyway, or is collapsing because of the fact of so many people have died or are sick.
There's a lot of angst over there about the response of the Chinese government and, being absolutely fed up with the lack of information and a lot of the, systems that are in place to kind of keep the general populace in the dark.
Absolutely.
And this is no exception.
And by the way, Trump in his 2019 State of the Union speech spoke about socialism in America because he knew that the Democrat Party had become the party of socialism, progressivism, and communism because they are one and the same. And Trump spoke about this at his State of the Union speech because he knew that the Democrats were firing up their base so that they could launch, a presidential campaign against him in 2020. And of course, you see who they put up, nothing but progressives and actually a socialist. I think they're all the same, quite frankly, including Biden. But here is Trump talking about socialism in the 2019 State of the Union speech, and here it is.
We are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free.
I think they're happy. So you heard that. USA, USA. That was just last year. Why is this relevant? Why are we talking about this? Why are we playing clips from Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump talking about the same thing so many years later after President Reagan was first
fighting the same ideological battle, Mark.
We're fighting the same ideological battle, but the difference is we're also fighting it at home.
At home.
With
yes.
Millennials.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you, Millennials?
Oh, God.
To be fair to our podcast listeners, Garrick is a conservative millennial. That's why he's on the show. But go ahead.
I would hope so. I really do believe, and I don't know if I'm just being optimistic here, but I really do think a lot of it is just, a very vocal minority group of my generation and a very young and inexperienced group of my generation who still has to go out and experience the real world for all it offers. And look, is it going to be a largely liberal group? Yeah, but am I hoping it's like a pro-union kind of, statism liberal value? Yes, as opposed to a full-blown socialist reorganization of government and private, politicization of private industry. Let's hope we can avoid that. But I struggle.
We don't have any choice but to
avoid that. Absolutely. But it's so hard for me as a conservative to kind of, I feel like I'm very good at putting myself in other people's shoes, but it's kind of hard to peg where the sympathies grow from. Because there's a lot of, if you look at media publications and the way that they promote socialism.
Because they were spoiled at home and used to everything being given to them. I'm sorry, this is the boomer view, by the way. Boomers feel that generally speaking, obviously, it's a generalization, doesn't apply to everybody, but generally speaking, millennials have had everything given to them. They've had it easy. They haven't had to actually join the military because it's not required. They haven't had to, actually sacrifice anything. Although your parents lived through, obviously, the Great Recession, and that wasn't easy. Millennials were kind of very, very cushioned from it.
I would love to push back on a lot of that, though.
Do it! Come on, do it!
For reference, I'm on the younger end of the millennial generation.
Yes,
so
you are.
Millennials kind of go about 10, 15 years older than me. So there's a good portion of them that kind of came into the workforce in 2008 during the Great Recession, and they got hammered with unemployment, especially things like that.
They did.
I also believe that the gig economy, for as beneficial as it is for a lot of things, also hamstrings new people into the workforce. And a lot of millennials are trying to find their foothold, and people who don't go to college. But that's a whole other issue, is college as well. Probably, Mark, when you went to college, it was significantly cheaper than when I go to college.
It was actually affordable.
And I think with the way society has tried to stratify young people into forcing them to go to college because your generation values that piece of paper significantly above any other type of experience, that a lot of young people feel they need to go to college. But in order to go to college, you have to assume a lot of debt if you don't do things in a very cheap-minded approach, which is also in some cases our issue, because I know a lot of students. I went about college a lot different than a lot of other kids did. I went for the cheapest possible schooling experience I could go for, because that's all I really cared about.
Sure.
But there's people who are like, I want to go to the techs or the big schools of the world in states far, far away to go experience home.
So you pay out-of-state tuition. It's a private college.
Absolutely. Next thing you know, $250,000 later, and you're working as a marketing, expert, and you probably could have done that for $30K in your home state.
I agree.
At a local college.
So what will the impact be on this pandemic? What will the impact of the pandemic be on the United States-China relations and global relations with China moving forward?
Big reckoning against China. Oh,
How so?
My God. I mean, look at everybody in the Senate, in the Congress. I think a lot of people are waking up to the idea that China is the Soviet Union of our generation.
Yes, it
they
is.
are the eminent global threat to peace, prosperity, and freedom across the globe, and they are probably the chief opposition to the United States at this point. And I think you're going to see a lot of people, like you said, shifting away production from China, which is a big structure of their economy, is their manufacturing and export control business. And that would severely hurt their economy, and I think it's necessary. Now, whether or not we bring those jobs back to the United States or we shift them to other Pacific...
Hopefully we bring the jobs back to the United States and rebuild the heartland of this country.
There's a lot of sympathy for that, and that's a lot of what I think Trump's platform is, and that what appeals to a lot of those Midwestern states.
No one talked about it until he ran for office in 2016.
He was the only one who was out there saying, hey, we have to do something about these people. Now,
Exactly.
whether or not it actually comes to fruition or we see people shift to other Pacific states or countries like Taiwan, the Philippines, other places like that, which have a good industrial capability, that remains to be seen. But one of the things that I get mad at conservatives for back in the day was when the Trans-Pacific Partnership was discussed. A lot of people didn't like the idea of a new trade deal because of what happened with NAFTA, and rightfully there was a lot of gripes with NAFTA, and it hurt a lot of American businesses.
You have to trust the persons who were negotiating the trade deal.
Which NAFTA was done under Clinton, and Clinton had a lot of ulterior, views towards a lot of first.
The Clintons got phenomenally wealthy off of NAFTA.
Yes.
I mean, they were broke, and then suddenly they got super wealthy because they're getting all these donors, including people from China.
And they still tried to steal stuff out of the White House
Absolutely.
when they left. But beside the point. But, I think that the Trans-Pacific Partnership or some kind of deal like that would be an essential necessity going forward to fight the influence of China in the Pacific region as well as globally, because they've moved into places like the Middle East and places like
China's
Africa.
an economic powerhouse. That's the bottom line because of their manufacturing
they
capability.
have so much more reach and potential than I believe the Soviet Union could have ever achieved.
Agreed.
The Soviet Union was very stratified economically. They didn't have the resources to expand.
They use their military to expand.
Yes.
China
is
is using
economy.
they're using economics to expand.
Yes,
So
and
they're a lot
look
smarter,
at the way our warfare has
smarter.
been framed in the last 20 years. It hasn't been... Look, Mark, when you were growing up, you can probably remember duck and cover and hiding under desks because the big threat in terms of power was through nuclear weapons and nuclear exchange.
Yeah, we had mutually assured destruction.
My generation has never had to worry, I believe, significantly about the threat of a nuclear war between us, China, or the Russian Federation right now.
Even though it's possible.
It's possible, but I think in the event that how history has progressed, it will never be a significant threat like it was in the 80s or the 70s.
But look how people are dying now.
But look at,
In a pandemic. Now people are dying in something, and by the way, we still don't know, and we're not going to know for a while, I'm sure. We still don't know whether this was man-made, this virus, or whether it was accidentally released. We actually don't know. And of course, it seems reasonable that it was accidentally released, but just think about what we're saying. Accidentally released, which means it was released, which means someone made it. And increasingly, a lot of experts that are high up in the intel community are saying that. But of course, right now, we're just trying to recover our economy and get as few people, get as many people healthy as possible and as few people dying as possible so that we can get back to norm. But it's not going to be back to norm, which is, of course, what this podcast is about. Yeah. Socialism kills.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot. It's a very much different world when we come out on the other end of this.
No doubt.
I think in how we trust each other, social interactions, how we believe the role of the government should be framed in response to our daily life, and things like that.
So here's what's interesting. Trump spoke at the UN in September of 2019, just a few months ago, at the United Nations in New York. He spoke there and he talked about socialism, but he related it to Venezuela, which is fine, of course, because obviously it's a socialist country and we see how they've run the country into the ground.
And it's right in our backyard.
And it's right in our backyard. But what's interesting is I'm wondering moving forward if Trump is also going to speak at the UN about how socialism kills and refer to China. And so we have just a clip of this speech that Trump gave in September 2019. And here it is.
One of the most serious challenges our countries face
Sounds exhausted.
is the specter of socialism. It's the wrecker of nations and destroyer of societies. Events in Venezuela remind us all that socialism and communism are not about justice. They are not about equality. They are not about lifting up the poor. And they are certainly not about good of the nation. Socialism and communism are about one thing only: power for the ruling class.
Amen.
Today I repeat a message for the world that I have delivered at home. America will never be a socialist country. In the last century, socialism and communism killed 100 million people.
100 million people died in the 20th century. And now here we are in the 21st century, and we all think we're so modern, millennials in particular, and they think that, they're immune to all of this. And what we're seeing now is socialism is still killing in the 21st century. And this time it is, of course, not just Venezuela, not just North Korea, not just Cuba, not just the actors you would expect, but of course it is China. And why China? Because when you're in charge and you're in a communist country, you can't be transparent. You can't try to fix things. You can't have a media that is curious, trying to ask questions. You can't vote out someone. You're in charge, and that's just the way it is. So you're going to kill anyone who basically, or banish them, or send them to concentration camp or a Uyghur camp, and you're going to make sure that they're re-educated or killed.
It's about ideological consistency. You can't have defections. You can't have intellectual differences. You can't have open dialogue and debate. A lot of the things that I think here in the United States we take for granted. Because, if you like or dislike the president, you can go outside and you can utter your opinion to anybody who's listening. In China, you can't. You're scared for your life. You're scared for your family, that some retaliatory measure might be taken against you, that you might just wake up and disappear one day. I mean, look at a lot of the doctors in the Wuhan province who were trying to get this message out there that this is going to be a significant problem in China in order to save face, made them, essentially disappear.
Yep,
we don't know where they are, what they're doing, what happened to them, if they're okay. And that's a lot of the realities in a lot of these countries. I rarely like to bring into like my family into this, but my sister, her significant other is a refugee from Cuba, and he's a little bit astonished by a lot of the attitude and sentiments here in the United States concerning sympathies, especially millennials, for sympathies for a lot of these statist policies. And I think we got to draw a definitive difference between social policies like how we approach healthcare and the state-run, centralized view of economy that a lot of communist policies dictate, which I think a lot of people still have sympathy for. And he doesn't understand quite why they would want that based off his experience in life growing up in Cuba and looking at a lot of these other, Central American and Caribbean countries that went through a lot of the same problems.
Absolutely. And Reagan, by the way, Reagan also spoke about communism and its inability to feed the people. And we have a clip on that, and very retro, and here it is.
The commissar in the Soviet Union who went out to one of those state collective farms, grabbed the first worker he came to, said, "How are the crops?" "Oh," he said, "the crops never have been better, just wonderful." He said, "How about potatoes?" "Oh," he said, "Comrade Commissar, if we could put the potatoes in one pile, they would reach the foot of God." And the commissar said, "This is the Soviet Union. There is no God." He said, "That's all right. There are no potatoes."
Classic Ronald Reagan, right? This is what I would like to see Trump pivot to. Right now, obviously, we're in a very serious pandemic. But when we get out of this, I would love to see Trump pivot to more humor about China and make fun of the communist regime and about how absurd it is that they have put this nonsense on the rest of the world.
I think his delivery would be really good for those kinds of barbs. He would be very good at, just joking up there in typical Trump fashion. Now, would it not be as structured and given how Reagan was? No, it'd be probably a little looser off the cuff, maybe a little vulgar, but
he needs someone to write the material for him.
Yeah.
But Reagan humiliated the Soviet Union. He humiliated Gorbachev, and he just completely humiliated their entire ideology. And Trump, of course, while we've played a couple of clips this podcast about how he is attacking communism and socialism and how America will never become a socialist country or a communist country, it's necessary at this point, I think, to pivot to humor, to basically make fun of it.
It's to win an ideological battle. And I think to do that, you can't just sit and barb at it and say that it is so bad, so bad, so bad all the time. You have to kind of approach it from different angles in order to make people sympathize with your case. Because otherwise you just kind of look like an angry person like Bernie who's just sitting there gaveling.
Always angry.
And hitting the wood. So, you got to differentiate a little bit. You got to take a lot of different approaches. You not only have to attack communism abroad, but you have to appeal to capitalism domestically.
Yes, you do. And you have, in particular, you have to, of course, appeal to millennials, which I think is really important.
Which is the growing voting bloc who will soon be of age where they'll actually get out and go
They'll
to
be
the
in
polls,
charge.
and they'll be in charge.
Soon enough, they will be in charge. So Governor Cuomo says that in New York, the pandemic is like 9/11. And you know what? 9/11 were attacked by terrorists, Muslim terrorists, and they killed 2,700 plus people in the United States?
2,700 in I believe the towers, plus another, the Shanksville, Pentagon.
It's awful. It's just awful.
Places, yeah.
And so that was Muslim terrorists. And I guess my question is, what is the difference between that and a pandemic that has been leashed upon us by a communist country that has decided that is going to hide from the media, it's going to hide from transparency, and it's going to hide from any accountability? I don't see the difference, quite frankly. And this is obviously going to be part of the fallout with China. Well, we have a quick clip, very quick, of Cuomo in New York just today talking about 9/11 and the pandemic and making that comparison. And here it is.
For a generation. We've done everything we can since 9/11 to make sure 9/11 didn't happen again. We lose 2,753 lives on 9/11. We've lost over 7,000 lives to this crisis.
Yep. Over 7,000 lives to this crisis alone. Communism kills. Socialism kills.
This goes back to that reckoning I was talking about earlier. And I've been very encouraged with a lot of the political response from a lot of our figureheads in response to this. And Cuomo's lines there are excellent. And I hope that, New York and as well as a lot of states take their own individual ways to protect their citizens in the event that this happens. But I think the federal response should be good too. I mean, if you look at Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, who's a very he might come across to some people as a little hawkish when it comes to China in terms of his attitudes, but I think he's spot on in respect that, China should be made to pay for what was done and the way that they hid it, and whether or not this was biological or this was man-made or just natural.
What is the price that China should pay? Is notwithstanding the obvious, which is there should be some sort of monetary settlement. I feel as though there needs to be another price too, and that's why I was talking about the humor of Ronald Reagan. There needs to be some sort of ideological settlement.
Do I think we'll ever get some kind of, cash compensation from the Chinese government in response to this? Absolutely not, because if you look at the way they've pivoted and tried to deflect blame and blame this that some U.S. Army regiment from North Carolina brought this to China.
Because they're liars.
Because they're liars and they're trying to, hold their country together and keep their regime in power. These things need to change, and I think this reckoning is the way to do it.
And this election is going to be about this.
Shifting
this election
economic.
The election's not going to be just about the pandemic. It's not going to be just about the economy. It's going to be about how did we get here?
Yeah.
How did we get to this point?
Look at the supply chains. Look how inept we've been at being able to get a lot of the things that we need in responses, that we've had to rely on China for essential drugs, PPEs, ventilators, and things like that. And what they've been sending have been largely defective. If you look at a lot of the European countries, a lot of some of the states that have gotten Chinese help, they've had to send it back because it hasn't been useful. It's
and
been
in this election,
terrible action.
Don't you agree also this election is also about which candidate, Biden or Trump, is going to be able to stand up to China and hold them accountable?
Well, the answer is
for
not
this pandemic.
Biden. I mean, if you saw the ad, I take political ads with a grain of salt because, of course, they're always framed in a certain way. But I think a lot of the things that came out in the newest attack ad against Biden on his belief against China, not even 8 months ago, even 6 months ago, he goes out and he says, China would never eat our lunch. We're so superior to China. They're not a threat, blah, blah, blah. We should be working with them and things like that. He's never been a very good foreign policy elected official.
Yes.
He's built a lot of legislation domestically, and a lot of them that are still, the law of the land today, and I'll give him a lot of credit for that. But when it comes time to making important foreign policy decisions, his time in the White House with the Obama administration, and even before that on the Senate floor, voting on certain provisions have been terrible. He was the only person in the room who said, no, Mr. President, we shouldn't go after UBL. And, whether or not that kind of thinking belongs in the White House, I'm sure is going to be left, it's left up to the voters, but I hope they wake up and see that, even if you disagree with Trump, I think that the framing of this election should really be about China, and Biden is not the guy.
I agree. And you know what? I have to say this. I have to give kudos to Cuomo for making that comparison, making the comparison of 9/11 to this pandemic. I think that's important because that is a Democrat who is really setting the stage for what is to come when the pandemic is over. Namely, that a foreign power, and basically foreigners, if you will, leashed upon the United States an attack. And this is an attack. And they need the folks who leashed the attack upon us need to be held accountable. In this particular case, we know who it is, right?
Yeah, we know who the enemy is.
I mean, before, in 9/11, we knew the enemy specifically who they were, but they also committed suicide.
Yeah.
And we also knew who was supporting them and funding them, and we went after their bank accounts and among other things.
But now the thing is, and I think this is an important distinction between those two events and why I think this go around with fighting this kind of an enemy is a lot more advantageous to our position. Fighting Islamic terrorism, you're not fighting a flag, you're not fighting a nation or an ideology. Well, you're fighting an ideology, but you're not fighting like a country. Fighting a country like China in a lot of the new ways that we conduct warfare, cyber, economic sanctions, and things like that. Yep. It'll be a lot easier with our tool belt of means in order to combat that kind of an environment. And I think that we're in a good position that if we all wake up and we all see who the 1,000-pound elephant in the room is, that we can address it fundamentally.
We need to speak to the Chinese people directly, and we also need to explain to the Chinese people directly why it is that we're moving the supply chains out of their country. Mm-hmm. We are not abandoning the people. We are basically trying to preserve ourselves and create basically a more self-sufficient economy.
Now.
And if you want to see something dangerous, is the WHO. That's what communism looks like. That's what socialism looks like, because they slowly but surely get inside of organizations, populate them, and then control them where they become corrupt. And the WHO basically said, one individual there said, we want to remove people from their homes once we determine that they have COVID-19. It's hard to believe that this would even be said by an organization that has the United States of America as its biggest funder. This organization basically needs to be folded and remade, in my opinion. But here's the clip.
In most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
Aha, so that's because in China, they use your cell phone to track you because they know exactly where you are, and they're using this technology to determine, of course, whether or not you were sick or who you've been with recently. And if you've been with someone who has been identified as sick, they're going to not allow you to travel, or maybe not allow you to do anything, or maybe worse. But this is the WHO. I mean, you millennials are going to have to fix this. Hopefully Trump will fix this too.
Their largest funder is the Chinese Communist Party. Second is Bill Gates, but
it's actually the United States.
The United States?
We're number one. Bill Gates is number two. China gives them a little measly amount, but they've managed to infiltrate it.
That's right. They're the reason the executive director or the head of WHO is in there.
And they probably paid off the individuals there because that's what the Chinese communists do. You buy off people. And look, these are people that for the most part are, in countries that don't have a lack of rule of law, and they get into these positions. This is what drives me crazy about the UN too. I'm sorry. The UN has a purpose. Okay, I agree. The WHO has a purpose. But once those organizations lose their purpose, we have a choice. We either pull funding and tell them to fix themselves, or we just create a new organization. Because the world isn't going to, certainly China isn't going to be able to lead these organizations because no one takes them seriously anyway.
I believe that the UN and the WHO serve an important purpose in dialogue and conversation.
Purely dialogue.
Dialogue and conversation, which was intended purpose after World War II and even after World War I with the League of Nations. It was just so we could all communicate on a place and get on the same page.
And create more transparency.
But we shouldn't be using these apparatuses as some overarching government structure that we believe has this tremendous authoritative power, because quite frankly they don't, and we shouldn't secede our sovereignty to to an organization like the UN or to the WHO and take instructions from them, because they're so corruptible. Look, I think it's like 100 countries in the UN have voted to basically wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And somehow we should take that organization structure as this big supreme, arching power that we need to adhere to. And I think that's a lot of the shame in the thinking of what's going on and why we need to have a different approach, because who's corrupting them? China.
Yeah, and
China runs it.
Case in point, here's the WHO leader lecturing Donald Trump. We have a clip on that, very short. Here it is.
Please don't politicize this virus. If you don't want many more body bags, then you refrain from politicizing it.
The media, the mainstream media said that this guy is lecturing Trump. I think he's threatening. It sounds more like a threat to me. And this is someone who just pull the funding from WHO, shut it down, create a new organization, because the only truly legitimate country,
get this guy out of here.
He's a Chinese
agent.
The world looks to the United States for leading technology in healthcare and in all areas of technology. That's where, because of our great education system.
In innovation.
Absolutely, in innovation.
Medical innovation happens here. It doesn't happen in Norway, Finland, Sweden, Iceland. It happens here.
And these people, it just drives me crazy when I see these organizations corrupted. And China has gotten so far without ever being questioned. I'm just tired of it. I mean, I know you are too. I mean, what are your solutions? Is your solution just to fix it or to just start anew?
You can work on fixing it, and I think that is the way to go. I think that it is as much an ideological. I think it's as much a show of power as anything. Is that if China wants to corrupt it, we snap our fingers and we make it whole again. And I think that utilizing that kind of power in the face of the Chinese government, who's trying to infiltrate a lot of these multinational organizations, is the most effective way, because I think it also sends an ideological message around the world saying, look, you can deal with them all you want, but remember who's the breadwinner in the household, and it's us. And you're going to need us going forward.
So get this, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe from Japan, he's already decided that he's going to pay firms, Japanese firms, to relocate from China elsewhere for the supply chain.
This was something I was looking to get in a little earlier, but I'm glad we circled back around to it. It is easy for you and I and politicians to sit around a table in the United States and say, we need to move our industry out of China and move our supply chains to other places to kind of facilitate, the opposition against the Chinese government. But because of the structure of our way of life, and that we give a lot of autonomy to businesses and corporations, we need their cooperation.
Absolutely.
We need to facilitate an easy way for them to move their manufacturing to other countries, into other means of doing it.
We need to work closely with our allies.
Work with them, with our allies, with companies.
And that does not include China, because China is not our ally.
No, which is why when I mentioned the TPP earlier, I would be in favor of some kind of solution like that, where with the other band of Pacific states in the region that have largely had the foot on their neck from China. We need to work with them. We need to allow Japan to continue to grow back into a world power.
North Korea, Australia.
Power, South Korea.
Australia is furious. I mean, there are all kinds of reports out of Australia.
What they're doing in the South China Sea and, invading into those waters down there. We need to convert countries like Singapore, who might be sympathetic with the communist regime because they themselves are a semi-authoritarian government. But
there's an enormous amount of work to do. And Trump, that's why it's so important that he wins a second term. But it's also important that millennials understand, that the American people understand that socialism kills, that communism kills. We're experiencing it in real time, and it has been perpetrated upon us by a communist country once again.
And it's a reckoning that I think Republicans need to come to as well, because, there's two very ideological different sects of the Republican Party when it comes to foreign affairs. There's the party who thinks that, the free market, which I understand the sympathy of it, that the free market should reign over all and whatever happens, happens, and that's the way of the world. But I also believe that there's the other half of that, who is that the United States serves a role in shaping international affairs, and that sect of the Republican Party should kind of use this event as a way to kind of give out their message that this is the way of thinking that we need to approach the world. And I think that's the side that I agree with, is that while the free market has its benefits, we can't have a free market with China in the picture.
Look, I believe I'm the kind of conservative that believes in economic autarky. Autarky refers to economic self-sufficiency.
Right.
So, of course I believe in free trade. Of course I believe in trade. It's really important. But trade is in addition to being self-sufficient. And to the extent that you allow yourself to no longer be self-sufficient and other countries can leverage you, like what's happening in this crisis, you realize that you are no longer a superpower. In fact, you are a third-rate country the second that happens.
Yeah, you're beholden to another country. What are you supposed to do?
And we were so close to that happening under the first, well, actually under the second Bush administration, then Clinton, Bush, Obama. And
we were seeding a lot of domestic production and a lot of things that made the United States self-sufficient. We were seeding them to a lot of things for cheaper goods. And look, I am all for buying a $2 shirt from Nike that's made in China.
Right,
that's fine.
That's not high tech.
But getting my ventilators and things that are essential for the healthcare system in times like these from China is less than ideal. And I think that although it's going to be more expensive, Americans should make the choice and understand what the greater conversation is.
Well, don't you understand the connection too, which I know you do because you actually brought it up, but it's like, well, wait a minute, you guys perpetrated the pandemic, China, and now I've got to buy my ventilators from you in order to stay alive? What you want to do is just give them the finger, really, because that's what they deserve, and they deserve a lot more than that.
A lot of American companies need a lot of credit for how they've, risen up in this time, and they've met the needs that have been coming in. Look, there's a global supply of PPE, but that is going to happen no matter how much production we make, because if you think about how many people there are and how much PPE we can make, it is absurd numbers. But American companies have been seeing
Clearly
the
it should be
threat,
made
and
here.
in the blink of an eye, in 2 weeks' time, we were able to go from absolutely zero domestic production to incredible amounts of domestic production on the back of the American corporate and manufacturing sector, and it has been incredible to watch. And we need to keep up that kind of an attitude.
It's pretty cool, but it has nonetheless disrupted our economy to the point that you'd rather go back to the economy that we had, since it was a strong economy and growing.
Hey, we just got to flatten the curve. We've got to continue combating coronavirus however we can in the best ways possible.
Amen to that.
Be safe, social distance, so we can get back to what we were doing.
So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. Mr. Assistant Producer, do we have some lead up to the dumbest bill in America?
Of course.
Let's hear it.
Dum 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 dum. Dum 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 dum. Dum 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 dum. Dum 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 dum.
So that's it. So we have the dumbest bill in America is a 21 and under cell phone ban.
Oh, goodness.
So it's a 21 under cell phone ban, which means that you cannot own a cell phone. You cannot own a cell phone unless you are at least 21 years of age.
Goodness gracious.
Otherwise, you are banned from owning a cell phone.
$1,000 fine if caught.
So the Vermont State Senator John Rogers, Democrat from Essex, Orleans, in the state of Vermont, introduced Senate Bill 212. The bill would make possession or use of a cell phone a misdemeanor and a $1,000 fine if you were under 21 years of age and possessing a cell phone. So, Mr. Millennial, since you guys grew up on cell phones, I want to hear that. I want to hear how stupid you think this bill is.
I had my first cell phone when I was 8.
You were 8 years old?
I was 8, and I had one of those cell phones that had like 4 programmed numbers, and I could call my mom, my dad, my grandparents, and one other person. And then that's how, when I went out and played, that I knew it was time to come home.
Yeah, but you're probably trying to use it to control the world, too, because millennials, we're very quick at the technology. Oh, hey, guess what I can do?
Yeah, but I think I had my first iPhone when I was in a 7th or 8th grade, which is kind of the way of the world now. And if I could go back and do it, I wouldn't want a cell phone that early. And if I ever have kids, I would try to stave off the whole cell phone thing as long as humanly possible, because I think that there are...
Really?
There are a lot of downsides to it. I mean, sometimes I can't help but just sit on my phone and look at it. I'm just like, God, I got to put this thing down. It's like it takes up too much of your time. It's just like a time sink, and it's
hours and hours
and
a
just
day.
Staring at a screen. And I think it's taken us.
Because you think you're going to miss something.
Yeah, fear of missing out is huge.
It's always social media too. Oh my gosh, someone just
are you
friended
seeing
me.
what this person's doing and that person's doing? Meanwhile, it's all just like a montage of the best moments of your life and ignores all the crap going on in it. But that's a whole different question for another day. But back to the bill, Mark.
Yeah, under 21 cell phone ban. So basically, you have to be under 21. If you're under 21, you're banned from owning one. But you could have to be 21 years of age, just like when you buy alcohol. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Mark, what is I think I'm sensing a theme here on Dumbest Bill. A lot of people are just trying to ban things.
Yeah.
It's just, let's
Dumb
ban
ban
this,
bills.
ban that. Something's annoying me, ban it. Get rid of it.
Absolutely. And by the way, it's almost exclusively Democrats who are in the ban sector. Occasionally there are Republicans that do ban things, right?
Well, it seems that we try to open things up over here, but sometimes we open them up in all the wrong ways because you get things like polygamy, but that's beside the point.
And those are the Republicans, by the way, that would do that in Utah. So, Electric Light Orchestra. Remember them?
Oh, yeah.
Of course
Great
you
band.
don't. You weren't even alive.
Oh, come on.
Come
Mark.
on. You weren't even alive. You don't know who they are.
I was raised in a good
loved
household,
ELO.
70s and 80s, vinyls on all the time. Loved me some ELO.
I loved ELO. So ELO, of course, talks about the telephone line, which of course is the name of the song. And we have a clip on this about this dumbest bill in America. And here's the clip. So what you would say if you picked up that telephone is, that's a $1,000 fine and it's a misdemeanor. I mean, basically in Vermont, that's the law. It's not the law, but it's a proposed bill that he would want. Of course, it did not pass.
I hope not. The logic there. I'm sure, hey, I'll tell you what, I'm sure Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile showed up in full force and said absolutely not.
Yeah, are you crazy?
Sent their lobbyists, probably scared.
Yeah, and every millennial, of course, well, millennials are already old enough, so it doesn't matter, but everybody...
Yeah, I saw a video where for
kids.
this bill, they interviewed a bunch of millennials, and they were like, oh, ban cell phones, how could you do that? I was like, I couldn't live without it. And I was like, well, I think maybe I'm sympathizing
Actually,
a
the
little
one
bit
thing
here.
I will tell you as a boomer is if you want your millennial when they're growing up, if you wanted your millennial to do what you really wanted, like, for example, they weren't doing their homework or they were constantly arguing with their sibling or something like that.
Take their cell phone?
Taking their cell phone was the best way to get them to adjust to what you wanted them to do because they were just like, no, you can't take my cell phone. I'm like, yes, I can. Yes, I can.
I pay the bill. You're dang right I can.
It's really my cell phone that I'm letting you use, even though they're all still on my cell phone bill.
Mark, sheesh, you gotta take it for a ride there.
So here's John Rogers. John Rogers is the state senator from Vermont who put the under 21 cell phone ban into place, or at least the bill into place. And we have a real short clip of him. I'm not really sure he makes any sense. I don't think this advances his argument, but here's the clip.
John Rogers out with a bill meant to be symbolic, to needle his colleagues.
I put it out there to try to make people think.
The Democrat is suggesting making it illegal to own a cell phone in Vermont till you're 21.
Something he hasn't done.
Arguing phones can be deadly, especially while driving. But Rogers says he wouldn't even vote for his own proposal. Rather, it's his creative response to what he sees as lawmakers chipping away at gun rights.
This was meant to say, okay, you don't value gun rights and you're willing to take mine away. I don't really value my cell phone that much. How would you like it if I took that away?
We're not really still sure. We've read a lot about John Rogers, State Senator John Rogers from Vermont, about his under 21 cell phone ban. We're still not sure exactly what he's talking about, even though you heard what he said. He's also said a lot of other things, and the media has reported it. It doesn't all add, none of it adds up.
It's a little funky, but I think you got to be a little funky to introduce a bill like this in the first place.
And to maybe live in Vermont. I mean, it is a beautiful place, by the way. It's a beautiful state.
Great state.
But I do think that after a while of being in Vermont, maybe you get a little isolated.
It's all that Bernie energy up
maybe
there.
they like the pandemic. I'm not really sure. That's why you moved to. So anyway, that is the dumbest bill in America, and that is it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining the Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins, and our producer, Adam Couture. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.